A pale, cinematic quiet has begun to settle over the idea of Australia as a promised land for Americans. What once appeared as a sun-drenched escape now reveals a landscape shaped by pressures many visitors never expected. The contrast is immediate. Wide coastal horizons still shimmer with the same magnetic beauty, yet beneath that brightness lies a cultural and structural tension that has begun pushing many Americans away. The shift is subtle but unmistakable, a growing sense that the country's rhythm, values, and everyday realities no longer align with what newcomers imagined. The first impression often forms long before any official decision to stay or leave. Americans arriving with expectations shaped by earlier decades usually notice how the atmosphere feels both expansive and constrained at the same time. The sky seems endlessly open, the air carries a maritime softness, and the cities stretch in low, calm lines rather than vertical ambition. Yet within that serenity, daily life moves at a measured, almost resistant pace. Services feel slower, appointments harder to secure, and the sense of availability, something Americans often take for granted, seems thinner. What appears relaxed to Australians often registers as a lack of urgency to Americans accustomed to quick responses and broad choices. As days turn into months, the deeper differences emerge more sharply. Australia's cultural emphasis on balance, modesty, and egalitarian restraint often clashes with the American preference for speed, scale, and clear upward mobility. The value systems diverge. Australians tend to prioritise time over output, predictability over ambition, and collective comfort over individual drive. For many Americans, this translates into a subtle emotional distance, an environment where self-promotion feels discouraged, networking feels muted, and professional pathways appear narrower. The cost of living amplifies the tension. Housing prices rise faster than wages. Groceries carry a weight that surprises even those from expensive American cities. And the expectation of paying more for less becomes a recurring theme in everyday life. Common interactions reinforce these undercurrents. Routine errands often involve longer queues and shorter operating hours. Healthcare appointments, while financially accessible, can require significant waiting periods. Workplace conversations skew toward understatement. Enthusiasm is dialed down, and ambition is softened into something less overt. Barbecue gatherings offer camaraderie, but social circles can feel slow to open. Small symbolic gestures such as reluctance to discuss income, cautious reactions to bold ideas, or the avoidance of strong opinions become markers of a cultural fabric woven tightly against disruption. Americans observing these patterns often conclude that the country runs on an unspoken rule: stay calm, stay modest, stay steady. These traits gradually shape the emotional reality many Americans experience. The slower pace, the understated communication, and the guarded social boundaries begin to influence one's sense of possibility. Many find that the initial fascination gently erodes into a quiet frustration, not because Australia lacks beauty or stability, but because the cultural ecosystem demands a different mindset than the one they arrived with. It encourages shrinking boldness, dialing down intensity, recalibrating expectations. Over time, this can feel less like adaptation and more like surrendering parts of an identity built around momentum and choice. Over time, the shift becomes even more pronounced as the subtle limits woven into everyday life start to define the experience more than the scenery itself. Many Americans describe an atmosphere where opportunity feels rationed, where career growth appears bound by invisible ceilings, and where the social fabric rewards predictability over reinvention. The cultural preference for stability shapes everything from workplace hierarchies to the tempo of public services. As a result, the country's relaxed charm begins to feel like a barrier rather than a comfort. What initially seemed refreshing takes on a different weight when the absence of urgency spreads into the realms where Americans usually rely on momentum to create change. These impressions deepen within ordinary routines. Cafes close earlier than expected, stores reduce hours without warning, and tradespeople operate on flexible schedules that rarely match the fast turnaround habits Americans are used to. Public transport runs reliably yet sparsely, widening the sense of distance in cities already defined by long commutes and suburban sprawl. Housing inspections feel competitive and stressful. Rental applications resemble job interviews. The structure of everyday logistics reinforces an emotional message. Life here is lived with patience, and impatience has no place to anchor itself. social life carries its own quiet complexities. Australians value informality, but they also guard personal space with a firmness that can surprise newcomers. Friendships grow slowly, formed through consistent proximity rather than immediate warmth. Direct compliments, expressive enthusiasm, and open ambition can all feel out of place. Many Americans find that casual conversations stay on safe terrain for long periods, making deeper connections feel distant. Even gatherings with colleagues or neighbours reflect a cultural tendency to keep relationships balanced, steady, and carefully unintrusive. It is a rhythm that suits Australians well but can leave Americans sensing an emotional neutrality that is difficult to penetrate. These everyday moments contribute to a broader transformation. As Americans adjust to the restrained social climate, the high cost of living, and the measured pace of systems, many begin reassessing what they hope to gain from life in Australia. The country's beauty remains undeniable, yet beauty alone cannot outweigh the feeling of limited movement. The very qualities that Australians appreciate: a calm lifestyle, a resistance to excess, an aversion to hurry, create an emotional landscape that can feel incompatible with the American instinct for growth and possibility. Gradually, a widening gap forms between expectation and lived reality, leading many to contemplate a return home or a move elsewhere. It is not disappointment that drives the shift, but a recognition that the cultural alignment required to thrive here is far deeper than anticipated. By the time the decision to leave gains shape, the emotional transformation is already complete. Many Americans come to understand that Australia's cultural design is not flawed, it is simply built around a different vision of what a good life looks like. The commitment to balance over ambition shapes workplaces that function smoothly but change slowly. The emphasis on modesty creates communities that value harmony but resist disruption. Even the landscape itself, vast and quiet, reinforces a psychological rhythm that encourages steadiness rather than acceleration. These qualities form a cohesive environment for those who grew up within it, yet they can feel constraining to newcomers whose identities are built on movement, reinvention, and abundant choice. As this realization settles in, a quiet clarity emerges. Many Americans discover that the discomfort they felt was not rooted in inconvenience alone, but in a deeper misalignment between cultural expectations and personal orientation. The slow unfolding of friendships, the muted emotional register, the high cost of urban life, and the limited sense of upward trajectory combine to create an atmosphere where potential feels suspended. For those accustomed to environments where ambition is encouraged and pathways are flexible, the experience can feel like stepping into a life that is already fully defined, with little room to reshape it. Yet within this contrast lies a broader insight. Cultural environments act as mirrors, revealing which values one carries most strongly. Australia's calm insistence on equilibrium highlights how profoundly Americans internalize dynamism and reinvention. Many come to recognize that neither system is inherently better. Each simply cultivates different emotional climates. Australia offers steadiness, predictability, and a wide horizon of quiet beauty. The United States offers motion, reinvention, and constant potential for transformation. The tension between these visions is what ultimately drives the decision for many Americans to part ways with the Australian dream. As they leave, the reflection that remains is both soft and universal. A country can be breathtaking, orderly, and deeply livable, yet still not the right fit for a particular worldview. Cultural comfort is not found in scenery or lifestyle alone, but in the emotional tempo a society chooses to live by. And in 2025, many Americans are discovering that Australia's rhythm, steady, measured, quietly self-contained, is simply a different song than the one they expected to hear.